our numbers are small. And history favors large nations, not small ones. So we have to compensate for our relative numbers. And we've always compensated with our brains and with our guts. But we're in a position now to compensate beyond anything that we dreamed of. Cyber is a real domain of power.
Okay, we're back. Part two. What's going to happen now is Captain Dan Hanley, former commercial 777 pilot, United States Navy, 30 years total flying experience. This isn't the guy next door or someone running an alien UFO channel or someone seeking a, quote, monetized successful YouTube channel. This is a very serious player, and he's about to tell you all about Dov Zakheim, the dual national Israeli-American citizen, the Comptroller for the Pentagon, meaning he had control of the finances for the Pentagon. And we remember our favorite man, Donald Rumsfeld, Rummy, the day before, I believe it was 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Rummy came up and said, oh, by the way, there's 2.8, was it, Dan? 2.8 trillion missing.
2.3. Yeah, 2.3.
There was a mere accounting error at the Pentagon of about 2.3 million, and I believe the total number is at least 4 to 5 trillion total missing.
The technology revolution has transformed organizations across the private sector, but not ours, not fully, not yet. We are, as they say, tangled in our anchor chain. Our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. We cannot share information from floor to floor in this building because it's stored on dozens of different technological systems that are inaccessible or incompatible.
Pentagon, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten. Consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
Jim Minery, a former Marine turned whistleblower, is risking his job by speaking out for the first time about the millions he noticed were missing from one defense agency's balance sheets. Minery tried to follow the money trail, even crisscrossing the country looking for records.
The director looked at me and he says, "Why do you care about this stuff?" It took me aback, you know. My supervisor asked me why I care about doing a good job. So
he was reassigned and says officials then covered up the problem by just writing it off.
The Defense Department's Inspector General has said that the U.S. Army made wrongful adjustments of around $6.5 trillion to accounting entries in 2015. He added that the Army lacked receipts and the invoices to support the figures and simply made many of them up. Many U.S. citizens have expressed anger over the news. However, mainstream media in the U.S. have largely ignored this story. News agency Reuters says the revelations so far are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to account falsifications by the Defense Department.
I noticed that Secretary of Defense Mattis at the time was trying a real attempt at sorting out the finances. That's another story. But Dan's going to go into the specifics of Dov Zakheim's direct. Remember, Dov Zakheim, dual national Israeli-American citizen, is also very good friends with Mike Chertoff, another dual national American Israeli citizen who was the head of the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, this is outrageous. And now a private contractor to the Department of Homeland Security, gathering data on Americans. So just these two people, let alone Rahm Emanuel, the former advisor, political advisor to President Obama, another dual national Israeli-American citizen whose mother was a Mossad agent, who was in the Israeli Defense Force, and on and on. Like we said, it's not penetration. It's occupation. So we have these key players of foreign nations, clearly, I don't even know what to call them, foreign aggressive agents of a foreign country, are directly involved in those attacks on 9/11 and the World Trade Center and Pentagon, which will then flow into, of course, the bigger strategic picture of the Odeganon plan, using American blood to break up pan-Arab nationalism and the Middle East, including Libya, Egypt, and Iran, to make way, as we postulate, as we put across to you the grand picture of creating the pan-Eurasian superstate, the Makinda world island, made up of Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Vladimir Putin, and Mr. Xi Jinping, attempting to push the United States after so much US blood, and British blood, I might add, and Canadian blood, and not to mention the massive civilian deaths that have taken place. Now, everybody hates America, and everyone is looking to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin as the statesman who will save the world. Meanwhile, America is shoved off to the side, beaten and broken and humiliated themselves and hated around the world. And that's been the plot. And we put to you that 9/11 was nothing to do with oil, and it was everything to do with breaking up the enemies of Greater Israel. So Greater Israel could be formulated. Israel becomes the cyber technology juggernaut. As we discussed, the American high technology sector can be transferred, as is happening now. Watch my channel. And we can see this all unfolding. We're looking at the specifics of 9/11, and we're looking at recruiting, of course, high-level people of any and all kinds. We've already got a few people on the books, very interesting people, and gaining more quality so we can go into legal specifics and in terms of solving a crime. As Christopher Bolin often says, who's done probably the best work of anyone on the details of 9/11 and Israel's direct, unending involvement, we're looking at a legal case, integrating that big picture, which I've been screaming about for 15 years. So, Dan, I'm going to hand over to you now, and you're going to let us all know the specific details, because Dan actually has a huge amount of knowledge on Dov Zakheim, this dual national Israeli-American citizen, and his companies, which were specializing in converting aircraft and all sorts of other things. And Dan, I'll hand it to you, and I don't think I'm going to have to interrupt you on this. I think you are going to speak for yourself with your own personal knowledge.
Well,
please take it away.
Okay, please interject anything you want to comment on there, Brendon. But Dov Zakheim dates all the way back to the Reagan administration, and he served in various positions in the Department of Defense all those years up to 9/11. He was also CEO of a company called System Planning Corporation that had huge military contracts, and this company developed a system called the Flight Termination System. Now, I believe it incorporates the uninterruptible autopilot with it, but the original design purpose of it was, say, for a missile test program, where they were going to test the flight of a missile. If it misfired or malfunctioned in some way, they were able to take remote control of this airborne vehicle and either fly it to a safe crash landing somewhere, or blow it up in the sky. So his company developed this system, and it was prior to 9/11, and we allege that it was in fact employed on 9/11. But if you look at where you pretty much summarize what I was going to say there, because in May of 2001, just 4 months before 9/11, Bush appoints him as Comptroller of the Pentagon, and he oversaw the budget analyst office that Brendon was talking about. That was conducted. There were over 50 auditors in there, and they were conducting an audit of this $2.3 trillion that was missing from the Pentagon budget. And guess where American Flight 77 hit? The Office of Naval Intelligence, that included the auditors that killed 34 of them and destroyed all the records. So I guess that was just a coincidence that Hani Hanjour was able to fly at ground level instead of just diving into the Pentagon somewhere. He specifically hit that office, and there's a phenomenon called ground effect. And if I had a picture of it, I'd show you, but essentially there are vortices that form underneath the wing. They're always there in flight, but when you get down close to the ground, they're compressed, and they form a cushioning of the aircraft when they get within one wingspan of the ground. And you experience this on landing, and sometimes you'll feel like you're floating down the runway on a landing. You got to push the nose over a little bit because you're in ground effect and land. Somehow, Hani Hanjour, flying Cessna 172, was able to fly through ground effect and precisely hit at ground level without skidding the surface this office in the Pentagon. So that was just a coincidence that he hit
it's a coinkydink, and it's just impossible. It's just impossible. You may as well have said he flew on a magical broomstick. It's about the equivalent. Yeah. It's impossible.
Well, if you look, there's a photo out there, and I'll try to get it to you, Brendon. There's a photo out there showing Flight 175 hitting the South Tower, and he's in that slight angle of bank that I talked about. There were 4 independent photographers, CNN and 3 other individuals, all captured on photo the underbelly of the aircraft. And there's a pod down there. Well, let me back up for a minute talking about the pod. Just hold that thought for a minute. This flight termination system employs a pod. And if you look at the pod, a photo of the pod, it strongly resembles what was on the underbelly of that aircraft, the flight termination system. So these photos were analyzed by a Spanish photographer, I believe, because people said, no, it's a shadow of the engine, or it's just the way the sun is hitting the aircraft. No, it isn't. This pod was there, which conclusively proved that couldn't have been Flight 175. Well, Dov Zakheim, prior to assuming his role as a comptroller at the Pentagon, when he was working at a System Planning Corporation, they contracted at least 32 Boeing 767, and they flew them to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. And what they were doing was the old KC-135 4-engine jet tanker that the aircraft used for airborne refueling, they were obsolete, and they were going to replace them with something called the KC-767. Well, if you look at photos of a KC-767, it has no windows. There were observers that said the flight coming into the South Tower had no windows on it. They said it wasn't an American airplane. You hear a woman screaming, that wasn't American, that wasn't American. The thing has no markings on it. It's gray in color, which would resemble a United airplane because they were gray in color at the time. But those 2 features, no windows on the aircraft, and observers saying they didn't see any windows on the aircraft, and that pod that exists on the bottom of the aircraft, which strongly resembles the flight termination system, proves that conclusively that wasn't Flight 175 that hit the towers. Now, if you go to Rebecca Roth, is an retired American flight attendant that's written 3 books: Methodical Illusion, Methodical Deception, and Methodical Conclusion. I think she wrote a 4th one, but her contention is that there was an airborne swap over Stewart Air Force Base, that with all the military activity going on up there in the area, it was easy to do, and that they were flown to Maxwell Air Force Base, and the passengers were required to make phone calls and were terminated. But Phil McConnell contends that they were flown out over the warning area off the East Coast and the aircraft blown up. So those are both theories that people have, and I can't prove that either one of them happened. But that all we can conclusively say is that couldn't have been Flight 175 that hit the South Tower. So what was it? Was it one of these KC-130 or KC-767 tankers? We don't know. But it wasn't United 175.
Yeah, on that note, Dan, with the Malaysian airline MH370, not 117 was the one blown up over the Ukraine, wasn't it?
Correct.
370 was the one that disappeared in 2014. I do believe it was March. Was it March?
I don't remember the month. No.
We'll put the date up on screen. But I was watching a documentary. Now I can't categorically say that maybe the pilot did have a sudden turn. Maybe he got suddenly depressed and decided to do some very strange things. I guess it's possible. But like you say, the pilot's dead. It's easy to blame the pilot. There's not a lot of evidence for that. But one thing I did note in the documentaries I saw was that he did almost. It was identical to 9/11. Transponders switched off. It was identical. And then I note that when he was flying and banked his wings over Penang, which is just in northern Malaysia, there, coincidentally not far from where I was staying. I was in the south of the country. He then proceeded to go to low level, and he was flying but between the radars, exactly between the radar systems of military radars of various countries. Now, this is in mainstream documentaries. I'm not sure if you're familiar. And the reason they know that was because of the pings they were getting off, I believe, the engine. Dan, that's something you can please. I watched a documentary whereby Rolls-Royce, the turbine producer, had a whole real-time telemetry of every one of their engines that was flying. Is that correct? Real-time telemetry?
Yeah, they can data link information from the engine to. As a matter of fact, sometimes you'll be flying along in the airplane and you'll get a call from maintenance in San Francisco. Such was the case in United. And they say, "Hey, flip that bleed switch; it's sticking on you." And we don't have any indications in the cockpit.
On that point, this is very important. Could they have switched that real-time telemetry off, in your opinion?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay, I don't know, but just in case people don't know, there's real-time telemetry, and the documentary I watched, which I cannot find anywhere, and to people watching, if you know where that documentary is, please, they show the Rolls-Royce jet engine place. They have huge screens, and they were monitoring in real time every single one of their engines, specific
Right.
engines that were in the air at any one time. It was a huge room, looked like NORAD. And I went, so they're in real-time telemetry, and they had GPS coordinates. They knew where they were. So that's something that has to be extrapolated upon and out. But the point was, as he was flying low level, they were able to, and a combination of the occasional mobile phone was linking. The co-pilot was occasionally picking up a signal, and there were other data links. Apparently there's, and please correct me on this, Dan, there's a data link to the satellite that would pop through every now and again, and they were able to just plot. And he was weaving, allegedly, this pilot is weaving in and out exactly of the military radars. And in my opinion, Dan, and please, I want to hand it back to you. In my opinion, this is clear evidence he could not have known the exact plots of where to fly between the military radars unless he had done some extensive study beforehand. I guess that's possible. But would not the far more likely theory be that, in fact, this was being directed by the automatic uninterruptible autopilot system, Mr. Dov Zakheim, to make sure no one knew where that aircraft was? And I put to you, without getting too off track, that if people understand Malaysia and Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, and that Malaysia had been a constant thorn in the flesh to Israel, they had been vehemently anti-Israel. They're banned. Their passports are banned from Malaysia. Dr. Mahathir, one of the reasons I liked him so much was he had a very big mouth. He would say some things which I thought were a bit over the top. But the point was, trust me, once you see the Belt and Road in China and Malaysia's resistance to this whole project, then you'll understand, I believe, it was a warning to everybody. If you keep messing with us, I don't want to get too off track here, but if you keep messing with us, Israel will disappear your business class flight and your first class flight from the face of the earth. Whether or not that's true, we don't know. But would you agree that this was good evidence that, in fact, the uninterruptible autopilot was tracking that aircraft in between the radar system and then to God knows where? We don't know where it went.
I agree that's entirely possible. If you go to my About Dan Hanley page on the website, I did 2 3-minute segments on Malaysian TV, and that's exactly what we discussed. So the Malaysian people had an idea that the system exists.
Dan, let's cut to that video right now. Boom, very important.
Okay.
It's not too long.
Yes, I do not believe the murder-suicide hypothesis is accurate. It's very easy to blame dead pilots for an accident because they cannot defend themselves. But there is a viable alternative explanation for what possibly could have happened to Malaysia Air 370, and it's very similar to what happened with the 4 9/11 aircraft, in that all 5 aircraft veered wildly off course. They lost communication, and they also lost their radar transponder that air traffic control used to identify the aircraft. If you Google Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot, the first thing you'll see is a Wikipedia article that's somewhat misleading. It states the stated purpose of this system is to prevent would-be hijackers from commandeering a commercial jet aircraft in flight by remotely taking control of the aircraft autopilot and flight management computers and guiding it to one of many airports in the world and safely auto-landing it. The article is misleading because it states Boeing patented it in 2006. While that may be true, we have proof that the technology was developed and produced in the mid-90s. So our contention is that this system was in fact employed on 9/11, but not to hijack an airplane and take it someplace to land it, but to crash it into buildings. And because of the similar flight patterns between the 4 hijacked aircraft on 9/11 and Malaysia Air 370, we actually believe that we allege that Malaysia Air 370 may very well have been hijacked because electronically, because if you look, there's no sign of any wreckage. It's a viable alternative. We cannot prove yet that these systems were employed, but we are working on that right now.
Dan, fascinating interviews, and a lot of people won't realize you've been on quite a few large television stations. Tell us about those interviews.
Well, I initially started out talking about my medical grounding on some TV stations, but then as more information became available and I got tired of giving those interviews, people get it that the word's out that if you speak out as an active pilot, you may lose your job. So I quit doing that and reverted to what we're talking about right now. As a matter of fact, with Scott Barrett on Jason Goodman's program, we devoted a whole hour program to Dov Zakheim. But the 2 Malaysian TV programs, I was just trying to point out to the Malaysian people that this system does exist. And very well, I'll go to my grave knowing that it was employed on 9/11. I mean, on the Malaysia Air 370 and 11. So,
particularly when you know the geopolitical aspects of Malaysia and that larger Belt and Road project, it becomes very clear. In fact, I lost the article. I had a brilliant journal article which disappeared off my hard drive. It was from one of those small Orthodox Jewish, a bit like Al Jamaina, which is a Jewish journal, where it said there is only one country resisting us in Southeast Asia, and we're getting really sick of them. Basically, I went, I wonder which country that is, which is of course Malaysia. So once you understand the incredible animosity, but I mean, Malaysia's cowed now. They're basically with the one MDB scandal and Najib Razak, and oh my God, the one MDB scandal, that's another 10-hour video. But basically China runs Malaysia now, and they're deeply in bed with China. And I was told they had no choice. They would collapse the economy, whatever. But I think we'll all agree, Dan, you've been on some major stations. Just tell us some more about Dov Zakheim. Is there any?
No, I really pretty much summarized.
Role?
I really pretty much summarized everything I know about the man. If you go to my YouTube channel on 9/11 Pilots, there's a full interview, and Scott Barrett injected some things that I didn't know during that interview. But I will mention that after he left the Pentagon, he went to work for Booz Allen Hamilton. You might want to expound on that, Scott, Brendon.
Well, for people who don't know, Booz Allen Hamilton is, of course, the subcontractor that Edward Snowden worked for. Edward Snowden, I believe, was working for Dell, and then he was subcontracted Booz Allen Hamilton to the NSA. Or I might have got that wrong. I think Dell might have been CIA. Dell is very close to the U.S. intelligence community. In fact, I think they may as well be a CIA subsidiary. Regardless, and of course, I think it was the former head of the NSA, was it McConnell? He was the number 1 at Booz Allen Hamilton. And it's just these coinky dinks, which I think many of us are just so used to. It's like, Israel runs the United States, and we just say it so casually. I mean, we're missing the profundity of these specific revelations, whereby you have Dov Zakheim, Comptroller of the Pentagon. Dov Zakheim, he's got a company involved with uninterruptible autopilots, which were clearly a front and center of the 9/11 attacks, and probably Malaysia and other things. I believe, though, and in fact, let's extrapolate on this right now. What's your view on the 737 MAX problem? Although clearly maybe there is a problem at Boeing, and I could speculate how many Unit 8200 and Telpiot program graduates are working at Boeing, which is a major military contractor as well, ladies and gentlemen. Remember the F-35 F-35 and Lockheed, most of the software programming, integration into multiple platforms, the helmet sighting systems, the electronic warfare systems, the multifunction displays are all Elbit systems in Israel. And once you understand, and we'll go into this later, all of the Russian and Ukrainian employees of these high security defense contractors, and you can understand why suddenly Russia's Su-50 stealth fighter has got a new helmet sighting system, and I can guess where that came from. So we can look into all these things whereby Israeli companies are intimately involved. But do you believe it's possible that the Boeing 737 MAX is in fact something to do with this uninterruptible autopilot system?
Well, I don't know in detail because I never flew the airplane how the system worked, but I did read basics, and I personally don't believe it is. I personally believe it was a system designed that if the pilot's angle of attack exceeded a certain limit, that if they tried to pull back any further, the system would automatically take control and push the nose over. And the harder the pilots tried to pull back to keep the nose, the more deep the dive would be. And they were fighting a control system, not realizing what was going on all the way in. So that's all I know about that system, and I can't really comment any more about it. But
certainly it's reasonable speculation, given the geopolitical context of the time, that it's not unreasonable. I note that I don't want to get too grandiose about my role, but if people don't know my role, I was personally named by the Israeli ambassador, the Israeli deputy foreign minister, and the entire Australian political class in a major court case back in 2010. That's how I got asylum in Iran. I was staying with friends of the foreign minister Zarif in his hometown. So excuse me if I sound a little grandiose. I think this Israeli high technology angle is the key to their success and what they're very worried about. So when I went to the UN, Dan, I don't know if you know, 2 days later that accident happened, and it was filled with 20 high-level staff of the UN. Then Cynthia McKinney got in touch with me, former congresswoman, saying, you have a body of work to be proud of. I know Dr. Mahathir, I'll get you permanent residency. When I went into the UN, I said, am I wasting my time, or are you a little concerned about a plane full of UN staff going down? And the guy went, shaking his head vigorously up and down, yes, we are very worried. I went, so I don't believe it's beyond the realms of Benjamin Netanyahu, particularly when he's staring down the UN, who he hates, for 45 seconds. If we remember that, we'll cut to that quickly. So if you think that it's not impossible, we don't know, we're speculating, purely speculation here, that if you can run an uninterruptible autopilot, I don't think it's mindless speculation to say that Israel could easily have dived those aircraft into the ground. But like you say, we don't know. We're just speculating. But Dan, let's quickly turn to a Qantas aircraft. This was 2008. I don't know if I told you this story. I was friends with Owen. Owen was an aircraft engineer, and Owen, there's a lot of interesting people retire in Perth. Now, we wanted to work together on contrails and electrifying the atmosphere for rain. If people think that's a bit far-fetched, just a very quick clip now of the premier daily news outlet of the ABC, the equivalent of the BBC. Here's Kerry O'Brien, one of the most highly respected journalists in Australia, talking about electrifying the atmosphere. Let's quickly cut to that.
And he said to electrocharge the atmosphere to milk unseen moisture from the skies. Greg Hoy reports.
Call him the Rain Man, and how apt. 2 weeks after the election was called, Environment Minister Malcolm Turnbull bet 10 million taxpayers' dollars, plus $1 million GST, he could make it rain, even when there are no clouds. He did so by bankrolling research into a mysterious ionisation technology promoted by the Australian Rain Corporation.
It was kind of difficult because he didn't speak English or understand English, so we didn't get a lot of information there. And as I said, the such written information as they had was all in Russian, so couldn't get anything out of that.
Okay, now that was coincidentally 2008. So I'm with Owen. We're talking about doing some investigations. Owen specialises in optics, but he was an aircraft engineer. He actually built the Kafir fighter based on the Dassault Mirage, which had the forward canards on the front. You may have seen pictures of it, Dan. So this is a very interesting fellow. And I was at his house when a Qantas flight approaching Northwest Cape, which is a highly secure, it's called Harold Holt Base, but it's the Northwest Cape of Western Australia. It's HARP-like facility with giant 300-meter masts arranged in certain configurations. Ostensibly, it's supposed to be a method by which ultra-low frequency radio waves can contact a deep United States Navy sub and tell it to come to the surface to get its instructions, particularly Third World War, the launching of nuclear ballistic missiles. You can imagine how sensitive this space is. It's clearly also involved with HARP. We're pretty sure of that. And a very interesting thing happened. It's happened before, but this I think it was a Boeing. Oh hell, I can't remember. 757. I can't recall. Anyway, flying from, guess where, Dan? Malaysia. Flying from Kuala Lumpur to Perth, 3 flights a day, every day. And as they approached, I hope I got that right, as they approached Northwest Cape, suddenly they lost vertical control of the aircraft. And there's documentaries online you can easily find. 100 people were injured, thrown into the ceiling, some seriously.
Qantas Airways Flight 72 cruises above the Indian Ocean headed for Western Australia. Flight 72 departed from Singapore. The flight path covers almost 2,500 miles across the southern Indian Ocean to Perth, Australia.
All right, Ross, out of my way.
Captain's back in action.
Captain Kevin Sullivan is a former Top Gun fighter pilot with the U.S. Navy. Ross Hales is the second officer. First Officer Peter Lipsat is the next pilot scheduled to go on break.
So, Peter, what's the update?
We're 100 nautical miles from the coast. Learmonth is to our left, and still cruising at 37,000 feet.
All right. Have a good rest.
Perfect weather is making for a comfortable flight.
We're over the ocean, and things were very smooth.
Any changes? Altitude and airspeed's the same. Smooth sailing. Now don't tell me I just jinxed us.
The captain notices his autopilot is no longer engaged.
Autopilot 1 disconnects, and now I'm hand flying. It's a bit annoying, but we have 2 systems.
Engaging autopilot 2.
I engaged autopilot 2, and no sooner had I done that than we started getting overspeed and stall warnings.
Stall. ECAM's showing a lot of errors.
Stall. Overspeed warning.
Stall.
How can we be in a stall and overspeed at the same time?
Stall. We can't. Airspeed's unreliable. Disconnecting autopilot.
That's the first phase of unreliable speed memory checklist. Autopilot off. And I'm hand flying now, manually flying.
Flight attendant Fuzzy Mayava finally has a moment to grab a bite to eat.
As I focused properly on the timer, 13 seconds. 13 seconds was the actual time. All I could see was the floor disappearing, like away from my feet. We were going up.
Sudden G-forces pull passengers up from their seats. Anyone not strapped in hits the cabin ceiling.
And next minute, bang. I must have hit the ceiling because it knocked me out. And I'm not sure how long it was for, maybe 2-3 seconds, 10. I just wasn't sure.
The G-force was enough, even with our 3-point harness, to lift us both out of the seat and push us forward as well. That's quite disorienting.
Flight 72 is suddenly in a dangerous nosedive. Captain Sullivan grabs the side stick to try to level his plane. It doesn't respond.
Once I pulled back on the stick and nothing happened, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not in control of this plane.
On the 7th of October 2008, a Qantas plane flying from Singapore to Perth declared a mayday to air traffic control. When it made an emergency landing at a small airport on the West Australian coast, it had on board more than 100 injured passengers and crew. They had broken bones, lacerations and spinal injuries, while compartment doors had been ripped from hinges and passengers' belongings were strewn throughout the cabin. Less than an hour earlier, passengers with and without their seatbelts on had impacted the cabin ceiling when the plane had twice dropped several hundred feet without warning.
A sudden loss of height, the plane being thrown around in the air and the screams of those around you.
For Qantas, which boasted an unparalleled flight safety record, this was completely out of the ordinary. The media was quick to blame the accident on clear air turbulence, but what really happened to the plane was something far more disturbing. QF-72 was an Airbus A330 plane that was just 1 hour and a half from its destination when all hell broke loose. The flight's captain, Kevin Sullivan, was a former US Navy fighter pilot. At the time of the accident, he had over 13,000 flying hours in his logbook.
When I returned to the flight deck, I knew that we were flying at 37,000 feet. The body angle was 2 degrees above the horizon. The flight control computers, however, thought we were flying at 50 degrees body angle and overspeeding at the same time. Now we know that's pretty impossible. It says that's where we're flying like this, I must protect the airplane. So it pitched the nose down. It went from +2 to -8.4 in less than a second. Look what the tail's doing. If you're back there, you're gonna feel the force.
What Captain Sullivan was coming up against was a change in how airplanes have been made in the last 30 years. Traditional jumbo jets, such as the Boeing 747, are controlled by the pilot through mechanical connections to the hydraulic systems which move the flight control surfaces, that is, the rudder, the elevator, and the ailerons. But the Airbus A330 is what's known as a fly-by-wire system, where there is no such manual control. Instead, the pilot's controls make requests of a computer, which sends electronic signals in order to move the flight controls. Fly-by-wire planes are lighter and more fuel efficient. They're also capable of executing faster and more precise movements than humans, and they reduce the chance of pilot error by preventing the plane from exceeding certain limits, known as the flight envelope. It is the flight computer's protection modes that prevent the aircraft from exceeding the flight envelope, and when they became active, they blocked Captain Sullivan's attempts to stop the computer's command.
It's like 2001: A Space Odyssey. Hal, open the pod bay doors. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't let you do that. I'm saying, don't push the airplane down. I'm pulling back on the stick. The computers are saying, I'm sorry, Kev. I'm not going to let you do that.
But the fact is that fly-by-wire planes have actually made air travel much safer. In the past decade, the number of commercial passenger flights has surged, while the number of fatalities in plane accidents has fallen. But in the case of Flight QF-72, the manufacturer's design prevented the pilot from overriding the computer's control.
In the A330 course, you're taught you must interact. You can interact with the plane. It's great. And when it works, it's great. But when it doesn't work, you're in the dark.
An investigation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau found that one air data computer was sending incorrect body angle and speed information to the 3 primary flight control computers, which reacted to the data by forcing the plane to pitch down. The flight maintenance log revealed that 10 simultaneous faults had occurred during the accident, and most of these had been hidden from the pilots.
The hierarchy of this particular airplane is that the computer is number 1 and the pilot is number 2. If they, for example, decide that you're overspeeding and stalling and they're going to protect you, there's no right to veto that.
But for Captain Sullivan, there's a bigger question left to be answered, and it's not just about the computers on board Flight QF-72. As we start to trust computers with delivering our goods and even driving our cars, just what level of control should we keep for ourselves?
I've never, even in all the extreme flying I did in the military, did I ever say to myself, hey, you're in trouble. Those are very profound words for a pilot to admit to himself, as I did, and saying, yeah, I'm in a knife fight with this airplane, and only one person's going to win, or one computer's going to win.
And as it was approaching Northwest Cape, well, Owen and I both went bit data drop, which is the equivalent of an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, which is very similar to what they pump out at Northwest Cape, these ultra low frequency pulses. He rang his friend at the NTSB, the National Transport Safety Board. That's the equivalent of the FAA. And here's a quote. I was there for the call. I didn't hear the guy because I wasn't on the phone, but I heard Owen say, "Hey, Bill, that was bit data drop. That was bit data drop caused by Northwest Cape, wasn't it?" Which affected the flight computers. And the guy said, Owen got off the phone laughing. The guy said, "Yeah, you're probably right, but you'll never hear us admit this. Now, I'm just presenting this anecdotally. If you can affect these the possibility, and I'm just not asking you for even comment, I'm just for the viewers, if you can affect these flight computers so easily, who knows what the hell they've got in there and how dangerous that could be. And wherever we look, what do we find? We find Israel far too many times for a coincidence.
Yeah. I wish Phil McConnell was out on bond down in Florida in Broward County right now, because he knows really infinitely more than I do about the specifics regarding the uninterruptible autopilot. Even Tim knows a lot more than I do about the specifics of it. But I will point out the fact that it does exist because, and I don't remember what year this occurred, but Lufthansa was taking delivery of a jet, and they do an aircraft inventory to make sure they got all that they paid for the aircraft. And they ran across, they found this uninterruptible autopilot and asked Boeing, and Boeing admitted, yeah, that's what it is. They said, we'll take it out of the airplane. So the biggest thing I suspect is 90% of the pilots out there don't even realize this system exists. It's not advertised. That's why that Wikipedia article on the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot, they talk about a switch up in the cockpit that enables the pilots to engage the thing. Well, there wasn't any switch in the cockpit when I was flying Boeing products before 9/11. Then they also give a few other ways. Pressure on the cockpit door can activate it. Well, there was no such system prior to 9/11. So we know it exists. And I suspect it's out there on all Boeing products, maybe even Airbus, I don't know. But it does exist.
Absolutely, and I think once people piece together the broad picture and this tactical specific information, I think we can make real headway into and pushing this information as a national security issue. First and foremost, that means affecting the US economy, because as I've said many, many times to people, look, you can go in with all this detailed stuff all day. Until people hear the word money and national security, they don't tend to act. But if you can couch your information in terms of national security, Israel is a national security threat, obviously, who is also stealing all your money via intellectual property theft. You show the relationship of Israel with China and Russia. As I've said to people, this is beyond belief. My entire channel is dedicated to this. This is just mainstream news articles I've put into videos, which I've made a little entertaining. I would say to anyone, simply watch my channel, watch them all. But if you have to, if time is short, watch 1 to 7, number 22, and also 45, 46, you should be up to date. And of course, this one, which I hope they're watching now. Once you understand that Israel is a cyber technology juggernaut, and Benjamin Netanyahu bragging that Israel is the second eye of the Five Eyes network. In fact, let's quickly cut to this little section, literally 20 seconds of Benjamin Netanyahu bragging, we're not the sixth eye of the Five Eye network, we're the second eye, and we're only a little bit less than America. Watch this.
That tall tower there is the United States. The United States is bigger than Israel. But it ain't that much bigger than Israel. And Israel is number 2. You know the Five Eyes? Israel is the sixth eye? No, Israel is the second eye. Israel is the second eye. Israel is the second eye. Israel is the second eye.
Okay, once you understand that, people, I want you to use your brains. So let me get this right. Israel is the second eye of the Five Eyes network, and yet there's news articles, which I'll show on the screen, saying the Five Eyes network is taking on and containing China. Well, hello, your little friend Israel is best friends with China and bragging it is combining Israeli technology, which is stolen US technology, with China's production capacity. And Dan, I don't know what you have to do to set alarm bells ringing, but this is what we hope to do. Instigate 9/11 for the national security in the grand context of what Israel is doing with Russia and China. So would you agree this is a tactic we have to push night and day?
Absolutely. And national security, you know infinitely more than I do about the specifics of it, but it's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. But I see 535 members of Congress that are owned and controlled by AIPAC and other special interest groups. You won't hear a word. I mean, Cynthia McKinney is my hero because she did, in fact, speak out, saying the members of Congress have to take the oath.
She's like you. She's like you. She's the one who pushed that till people woke up. Hardly anyone knew. You have to do this oath and sign a form. We support Israel, or else.
Right. So you won't hear anything from Congress. In my mind, the Zionists have infiltrated every level and branch of government, industry, Hollywood, the media, you name it.
I agree, Dan, but I disagree with you. You won't hear a word unless you couch it in the proper terms. National security, the mainstream media has already done it for us. China and Russia are the economic and military competitors of the United States, particularly China. All I have to do now is show Benjamin Netanyahu making sweet, passionate love to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Case closed. Case closed. What more do I need to do? So on national security, and of course they know this, there's clearly things happening behind the scenes, but if we can influence and push it, we've got to keep pushing. We want to kick this subject over the edge of the cliff. It's already happening. We've been contacted by lots of different people. And I believe we can. I remember people, Cynthia McKinney, as we'll put on the screen, the email, you have a body of work to be proud of. We need to get across to people this tactic and stay focused. There's no point bringing up these silly things like Holocaust numbers and arguing about, I don't know, ancient 200-year history. It's all interesting, some of it, but it's not going to get the attention of the people that matter. And I've shown you clearly, Dave Frasca single-handedly stopped 5 separate investigations. So there were 5 groups of FBI agents, one after the other, coming saying, hey, there's a problem. There's these very suspicious Muslim men, mostly from Saudi Arabia, who are learning to fly, and we're getting phone calls left and right about the suspicious. And one guy stopped those investigations. So people need to understand, Alexander Dugin, the former Russian GRU briefer, whose father was a general in the Russian GRU, which is Russian military intelligence, says we are going to destroy the United States. We can't do it militarily. But what we're going to do is we're going to bring it down via other methods. And one is we're going to use active measures and make Americans completely distrust their own institutions. So they won't ever engage with them. They'll stay subcultured and hidden away on their little internet ghetto. They're not talking to anyone. As Adam Curtis in Hypernormalization, the documentary, said, all these people are angry. But their algorithms, whether it's Cambridge Analytica or Zach Massingham on Aggregate IT, who with Dominic Cummings brought forward the Brexit campaign, what they're doing is making sure only people who agree with each other are talking. So you're on your little subgroup getting backslaps and you're getting thumbs up and you think, oh, I'm being validated, I'm doing the right thing. Maybe they send you some money, but you're not talking to anyone. And you're certainly not talking to anyone who can affect real change. The only people, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Dan, to sum this up. I think we've finished. I think we've addressed all we need to address. I want you to have the final say. As a man who served in the United States military for 10 years and then overall over 30 years of flight experience, I put forward that the only people who can truly solve this, it's not going to be idiots doing successful YouTube channels. It's not going to be sending endless links to people who are stuck in their houses. We need to get the information to the institutions, the men and women with the firearms and the threat of force who can actually change things.
Right.
And we need to understand that the US military and the Pentagon clearly is not all in their pocket, that there are enough good people through the CIA, NSA, DIA, ONI, you name it. They're good people with mortgages and children. They love their children too, as Sting sang in that great song, I hope the Russians love their children too. They love their kids. And they just need that public grassroots feeling that, hey, this subject's important and I can safely come out. I can safely come out and say this. So on that point, Dan, would you agree that we've got to get people trusting their institutions again? Not all the way. We all know it's corrupt. But we're getting to a point now where pilots and employed people in the military and in intelligence are looking around going, I don't know if I'm going to have a job soon. This could be really serious, potentially very serious. I think these people are now open more than ever. Would you agree?
I would agree with you 100%. And that's what needs to happen, is the not the admirals in general at the Pentagon, because we know where they go to defense contractors.
Well, yeah, they're on the board with Henry Kissinger at Lockheed.
Right.
Place.
But your lesser ranking officers in the military and the Pentagon that's been infiltrated, as you'll point out, need to speak up. I mean, I'm not saying I'm promoting a military coup, but something on that order needs to happen at the intelligence agencies also. But we'll see, and I think it's programs like this that does get the information out there. If I could close with what happened to me on Facebook and in the States and last May. Yeah, I believed in Facebook for a while and knew NSA was looking at it, but I didn't know to what extent. I had over 10,000 Facebook friends, and just several weeks ago, I posted something on the uninterruptible autopilot, tying it to the 4 9/11 aircraft and Malaysia Air 370, and I also tied in Jacob Rothschild, and I was immediately banned from Facebook for security reasons and couldn't get back on. So I reopened another account, and I was on it for a day, I believe, and they shut me down again. So I got another email address and opened the third one, same thing, for security reasons. But I'll jump back to May last year. My wife and I hadn't been to the States for several years, and we saved up enough money to go back. And the very day I made reservations on Qatar Airlines to go through Doha to Atlanta, it was a month before we were leaving. The FBI in Washington calls my ex-wife and wanted to know everything about my trip. So I said to my wife, something's up. So I called the FBI in D.C. I said, what's up? Well, they wouldn't give me any information. But when we got to Atlanta, we're walking in the immigration hall where you get your passport stamped, and she had to go over the foreigners line. I'm standing in the U.S. line. I wasn't there but about a minute, and a man and woman escorts my wife over, and they whip out their badge. One was an FBI agent, the other was a TSA agent. They said, you got time for questions? I go, sure, I thought you'd be here. So they took us over, escorted us over to a desk with no line, and they said, here, stamp their passports. And when the immigration officer gets on the computer, he looks up the FBI agent and said, you know this guy's red, don't you? And they go, yeah, we know. And I'm thinking, what does red mean? I didn't ask them, right? So we go in this room. They want to know everything about my trip, where I was going. But that was about all they asked coming into the country. But leaving the country, my wife and I were walking down a crowded concourse. They obviously knew my flight number again. And I was approached from behind by another FBI agent, TSA agent, identified themselves, and they escorted us to a room where we spent about a half hour talking. And they said, first of all, he said to me, thank you for 10 years of service in the Navy. Bang, they knew that. Then he said to me, and we're honoring your First Amendment rights, freedom of speech rights. And then he went on and proceeded to tell me, I said, look, I know what you have me in here because I'm very vocal about U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and South Asia since 9/11. And I also don't believe the official 9/11 story. And my wife starts laughing, buries her head in her lap. She goes, he posts on Facebook. The only reason I'm pointing out this story is they know everything about you. They knew my groups. They knew everything on Facebook about what I was doing there. So I'm off Facebook, but I lost 10,000 friends, and I just wanted to get my other social media sites, hoping that whoever was my friend and is listening to this will come join me on the others because I miss them. So I'm on LinkedIn at Dan Hanley. I'm on Twitter at Dan Hanley 4, and I'm on Reddit at Captain Dan 135, and I got a YouTube channel at 9/11 Pilots. We do. And there's about 15 videos on there. Some of them are interviews of me, but others are will be of interest to you. So that's pretty much what I wanted to close out with, Brendon. If you got
Dan,
anything else.
If I can, I'll close up too. Just I often forget, a lot of people may not realize. If you don't know my story, I'm an Australian citizen. I was a comprehensive registered nurse. I quit for a while and was returning to do a re-registration program. I was working at Princess Margaret Hospital as an orderly in the ICU, waiting to do my re-reg program, when I decided to attend a Friends of Israel rally and defend the Palestinians. We took a video. There was an altercation. This led to race hate charges. But I said, great, let's go ahead, because I want to introduce the Israeli high technology sector and the subversion of Australia. Our Collins-class submarine, which was Israeli modified systems. I pointed out to police that Israel was deep in bed with China, so now China had all the specifications of our weapons and sensor system, and this is what started it all. I was a nobody. I simply had an interest in military technology on the side, and obviously I had balls enough to, hey, let's rock, let's go to a trial. Here's a quick clip. Here's some clips of me with the police abusing, I ended up in bottom line, I ended up in a huge fight with the state police because one of them threatened me like an idiot, and it was on.
You, okay? You were already in the house. You lied. All right. You f***ing lied, buddy. Okay. You want to be respected as a copper.
Listen to me.
No, I'm not listening to you.
You keep that language up.
Want to be... Don't try your pious bullshit on me.
The public can hear it from the street.
I couldn't care less. You broke into my house. You broke into the front of the house and then you f***ing lied.
If you keep that language up...
You lied. Detective Timothy Piani lied. Detective Timothy Piani sat there with his boss from the State Security Unit and he said, Brendon, when this court case is over, it won't be over. That's what you, Timothy Piani, said to me. You think I'm a chump? Do I look like a bitch?
The reality of it is...
Tim. You have... mate. Not a chance. I'll fight this to the death, Tim. He is tightening the cuff deliberately on my left hand.
We're going outside.
This is about SAS Campbell Barracks, Leon Wind, Variant. Timothy, you told me that Variant does your local and national, your local police intercepts, an Israeli intelligence front.
We're going to pop you in the car.
Yeah, I know you are, Tim. You, Tim. Okay. I'll tell you what, mate.
But they came to me at one stage just to encourage people. This is back in 2009, 2010. This is how long ago this was. Capani and his immediate supervisor came to me. I said, listen, I'm being harassed. I want it to stop, or there's going to be trouble. You haven't seen the worst side of me yet. And they put their hands in there like this. And he said, listen, this is a verbatim quote. I just want to encourage people. The West Australian police put their hands in the air and they said, listen, we are the arresting detectives. We have a conflict of interest. We can't really speak to you, but we urge you, please just focus on winning the case. We want to talk to you about what you write about. That's a quote. And at that stage, being a typical Scorpio and probably slightly immature personality, I was just sitting there going, my teeth going, oh yeah, what about the threats 2 weeks ago? Because Paani said, oh, well, you have a really interesting hard drive. He watched every single documentary. So because of this police raid, and this is an interesting thing people are raising, Google was having problems, as was Facebook, because they had to vet all this material. And of course, all the vetters at Google and Facebook and other places and YouTube were watching all this material, and they were coming to the truth. And they're going, what are we going to do? Every time we get these people to review the material, they go, hey, that's true. Yeah, those buildings couldn't collapse. Oh, Captain Dan Hanley's right. So the police actually said, and I will tell people, interestingly, Detective Paini's favorite video out of all the stuff I had on my 500 gigabyte hard drive, which was a bigger hard drive back in 2009, his favorite video, which blew his mind, and these guys are all ex-army, a lot of them ex-counterintelligence, SAS, Special Air Service, which is based in Perth, Western Australia, my hometown, Campbell Barracks. He was blown away by Kay Griggs' talks. The 7-hour talk by Kay Griggs, whose husband, George Griggs, if you didn't know, was Marine Corps colonel, but was attached to NATO and the assassination program working with Israelis. And she lays out what they get up to.
The highest levels of the Marine Corps and the Army in those special operations levels, the individuals are actually in the mob. New Jersey.
You're talking about the mafia type mob?
I'm talking about the Brooklyn, New Jersey mob. My husband, Al Gray, Sheehan, they're all Brooklyn. Cap Weinberger. Heinz Kissinger, there's the Boston mob, which was shipping weapons. And I don't want to get too deeply involved in that, but it goes, Israel, some of the Zionists who came over from Germany, according to my husband, were, see, he works with those people. They do a lot of money laundering in the banks, cash transactions for the drugs that they're bringing over through Latin America, the Southern Mafia, the Dixie Mafia, which is now my husband's involved with in Miami. The military are all involved once they retire. They're, you know, they go into this drug and secondary weapons sales.
The blackmail, the sexual blackmail, trust me, she was the first in 1997 with Pastor Strawcutter. And that was the video that state counterterrorism totally blew their mind. And I'm sure, Dan, if they were watching someone like you, someone with your status as a professional, as was Kay Griggs, whose husband was George Griggs, very articulate, masters in history and so on. If we get this material into the hands of policing, who actually tried to befriend me, but I was too stupid, and I'd like to add that as the years went on, I met, of course, Minister Joe Francis in charge of prisons, who I made a complaint about staff. Well, I did more than make a complaint. I said, if you don't investigate him, I'll kill him. That was the guy who broke my arm and had me half beaten to death in jail on 9/11/2012, which is another story. Joe Francis is best friends with the former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, and his commissioner and 2IC at the time was James McMahon. Who is James McMahon? James McMahon is a colonel, SAS, Special Forces, the Special Air Service, retired, who also links in with some of the highest levels of Australian and, of course, British and American intelligence. And I was invited out for beers, and they asked me, could you please relax? Because that was my problem. I was on a war footing. He said, we've got your back, relax. And the minister, my state is so bad because they're so in bed with Israel. The foreign minister is best friends with Benjamin Netanyahu. The country's media mogul is a local Perth, Western Australian boy, Kerry Stokes. High-level Mason, best friends with Benjamin Netanyahu, who's best friends with Crown Casino. James Packer, if you didn't know, is on bribery charges with Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's all located in my little hometown of Perth, Western Australia. So I'm in Iran, hanging with the associates and friends of the foreign minister, Zarif. I hope we've got people's attention. I hope we've got people's attention to please listen to us. If you have any questions, we have plenty of my UN 1,000-page document is linked to below. You can see everything. Incredible audio-visual footage I've linked stuff to. All my paperwork. You'll see links to Dan's website at 911pilots.org. You'll see links to Tim at abledanger.blogspot.com. And you will see links to many other briefing documents and how we're trying to get our paperwork and how we're trying to get our presentation into formats that are easily digestible, and we can take it to lay people as well as professionals in as short a time as possible. And it's one thing to have some screaming nut, of which I've been as well. When I get angry, I've got exclamation marks and I underline my emails and I write letters with big, you look like a nut. We've got to get it into calm. And look, I'm the worst. I laugh at some of my old stuff. I look at, oh God, did I write that? But calmly lobby at multiple levels over time. We're not going to die tomorrow. There's still time. So we're going to lobby very specifically. So come on board, support us financially. We only need $1 from 1,000 people on my Patreon and $1 to Dan and Tim, you know, from 1,000 people a month, and we can live, we can at least pay bills. So it doesn't take too much to at least, but we're looking at trying to lobby. We've got Sufyan in Saudi Arabia, who's a great diplomat and has great contacts. We've got a whole bunch of people, very interesting people that agree, look, we've got to do something and we've got to get serious. So the ship is sinking. We're at a critical point, and I think we're going to have to put aside, including myself, a few problems we have with people to solve this problem, to at least patch up the ship so it can continue operating. Dan, let's wind it up. There's still lots more to talk about. Let's wind this video up now, and let's move forward. I'm very excited. I know it's a tough time. I know it's a delicate time, but I urge people that we're always dying. The Second World War was a catastrophe. Life went on. It's a very interesting time, and I understand if you have kids and you have mortgages, you're stressed out, but I urge you, do what you can. If you can spread links, spread links. If you're in a wheelchair and you can hand out a flyer, get down to Fort Bragg, hand out a flyer. It may be that martial law is declared, in which case there's going to be lots of US troops on the street. My view is think positive. Great. Lots of US troops, easy access to hand out flyers and chat to them. Again, on national security issues. So I'm very worried about Israel, and we have briefing documents, and in the end we want to get enough money to pay graphics design artists to have glossy, easy to read books and material that you can take to the right people. Dan, thanks so much. I love chatting with you and Tim and others, Sufyan and so many other people. Let's see what we can do. Let's be positive and let's move forward, and we'll cross obstacles as we come to them. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Brendon, for having me on this program. I think it's so important, especially the information you put out, because you're so knowledgeable and can eloquently state your case. So thanks again, Brendon.
No problems, Dan. And you make me want to be a better person. So no more ranting. I keep saying that. All right, great people. Stay in touch. Let's keep fighting. Don't lose heart. Let's just keep moving forward. It's all we can do. Keep swimming. Thanks. Ciao for now. Hora fez. Jumpa lagi. Jumpa nanti. And I'm not going to say where I am now, because if I use that language, you'll know where I am. But we'll talk about that soon. Ciao.
Going to have to. I'm in a knife fight with this airplane, and only one person's going to win, or one computer's going to win.
Yeah.